Ladies, welcome on into the show today. I'm really, really glad today because I have Alison Lim with me. Hi, Alison. How are you?
I'm very well, Rebecca. Thank you.
Thanks so much for joining me. Alison has a career working in consumer goods businesses all around the world and currently works for a leading beauty company here in Australia. And Alison and I have been talking about the idea of inclusion and introversion and how these things are intrinsically connected. And I said to Alison, would you like to come on the podcast? Because it's such an important topic that we talk about the various aspects of inclusion. And, we've kind of hit upon this point that we think introversion actually is a really kind of underrepresented, if you like, group within this concept of inclusion. So we wanted to talk about that today. Alison, in your experience, the corporate world is sort of geared towards favoring extroverted communication types, if you like. What are your thoughts around this need for being more aware of how, introverts are obviously adding value all day long, but if they're not given the opportunity to speak, for example, then how do we know that value? What are your thoughts to that in your experience?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And look, I actually never thought at any point, hang on a second, I'm an introvert. It wasn't a label that I gave to myself. And I think that it's something that obviously, as you move through corporates and you do Myers-Briggs exercises, you start to understand there's a label. And sometimes I get colleagues saying to me, "Oh, Alison, I know you're an introvert, um, but," and just to have that label sometimes is quite confronting because I've never seen people as extroverts and introverts, but just that we're all different and we have our own style. And I think introverts, or those who are perceived to be quieter, actually have a lot to say um, in many forums. But what we tend to do is wait for others to speak first. I think we're probably better at listening. And then what we say actually is quite direct and straight to the point. So I think that introverts might not necessarily weigh in on everything within a conversation, but they'll say what is needed um, and relevant at the right time.
Yeah. And I think you're right, because communication is not just about speaking, is it? It's also about how we listen and how we actively absorb information rather than just, coming up with the first thing that comes to mind and just speaking for the sake of speaking. But it is a balancing act between the two. And I think that introverts naturally have that strength in listening deeply to what's going on and connecting dots, I think, between bits of information and bits of data to ultimately come out with maybe a more thought through or deeper thought through comment or solution to a problem. Um, and I've seen it throughout my career, working in corporate environments. I think so many environments within a working day really favor that more overt communication style in terms of meetings, and speaking up in meetings and public brainstorming and, being asked your opinion on the spot. Those are all examples where, introverts might not naturally feel very comfortable at all.
Mm,
And I think it's that awareness that we all need to be kind of, more aware of so that when we are running team meetings or when we're engaged in team meetings, that we have that conscious awareness to make sure we're including those different perspectives in the room.
absolutely, 100% agree.
Yeah.
And look, I think with introverts in meetings, introverts are just waiting for everyone to stop talking and then they'll come in and, as I said, weigh in. But they're probably not likely to talk over somebody else. I think that's the key thing. But they usually do have something to add. And as you mentioned, with consideration of all the different data points that they have and listening to all the views around the room. So I think what comes back is usually a um, more rounded comment, a more rounded thought through answer or contribution.
Yeah. And like you say, doing those sort of personality profiles where you get sort of labeled in a particular way, there's that feeling that if you're labeled as an extrovert, then that's just the kind of way it is. But if you're introverted and you're labeled in that particular way, then somehow you need to do some work, or that's seen as a weakness or
That's
whatever it
right.
might be, which is ridiculous. Because like you say, it's just like a different way of communicating. It's just a different way of thinking or solving problems. And I think it's, when we're talking about inclusion, it is about understanding that there are lots of different ways you can arrive at a solution, and actually the more diverse thinking you have to get to that outcome, the better.
Definitely. And look, I think corporates are changing a little bit. I think that there are roles that are coming to play that are much more important than they used to be. For example, data analytics and data scientists roles. And the sort of personalities you meet sometimes within some of those areas tend to be more introverted. So I do think, that the needs of the business is starting to have to incorporate more types of people, and accept that not everyone's the same. Not everyone's going to be able to stand up in front of a boardroom and explain a presentation with, a lot of storytelling. But you know what? They get the job done, and they're great at the numbers, and they understand all the data and the technicalities of a role.
Yeah.
And in that way, they're adding huge amounts of value, because, their modus operandi is actually that technical aspect, and getting the big, sort of intellectual work done, but not necessarily being that master storyteller.
Yes.
But a leader in their own way, and a leader
That's
in
it.
their own environment.
That's it.